Hezekiah, unlike his father Ahaz, was a remarkable leader, earning uncommon honor during his reign by doing what was right in the eyes of the Lord, much like his ancestor David. In the 3rd year of Hoshea, Hezekiah became king at the age of 25, ruling for 29 years in Jerusalem. His mother, Abi, was the daughter of Zechariah. Following in David's footsteps, Hezekiah dismantled the high places of worship and eliminated idolatrous elements, including the Asherah poles. Notably, he destroyed the bronze snake, known as Nehushtan, crafted by Moses centuries earlier for healing. Despite its divine origin, this object had sadly transformed into a worshipped idol, Numbers 21:8-9. Hezekiah's commitment to God's commands set him apart from other kings of Judah. He went on to remove pagan worship sites, images, memorial stones, and Asherim, demonstrating his dedication to purging any form of idolatry, 2 Kings 18:4-5. This distinguished him as a king who stood above the rest, faithfully adhering to God's directives. Hezekiah's dedication to the Lord was evident as he destroyed the bronze sculpture Moses had made, named Nehushtan, which had become an object of incense burning among the Israelites until that time. In stark contrast to the unfaithfulness of many kings, Hezekiah was a beacon of righteousness. The Lord's favor accompanied him, making him stand out among all the kings of Judah and those who came before him, 2 Kings 18:6-16. Hezekiah's success continued, marked by his rebellion against the Assyrian king, his victories over the Philistines, and his refusal to serve foreign powers. However, the northern kingdom, Israel, faced dire consequences for their disobedience to God. The Assyrian king captured Samaria, leading to the exile of the Israelites to Assyria and other regions. In the 14th year of Hezekiah's reign, Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, targeted Judah's fortified cities, excluding Jerusalem. Despite facing challenges, Hezekiah sought a peaceful resolution, acknowledging any wrongdoing and expressing a willingness to bear the consequences. Hezekiah faced a daunting challenge as the Assyrian king imposed a heavy tribute tax on Judah, demanding 300 talents of silver and 30 talents of gold. To fulfill this demand, Hezekiah emptied the treasuries of the temple and the king's palace, even stripping gold from the temple doors and doorposts. Sennacherib, the successor of Shalmaneser, proved to be a formidable adversary for Hezekiah. Despite Hezekiah's initial miscalculations, Sennacherib attacked and conquered all of Judah's fortified cities, sparing only Jerusalem. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Hezekiah admitted his wrongdoing, attempting to appease Sennacherib by offering a substantial ransom, depleting both the royal and temple treasuries. However, the Assyrian threat escalated further. God orchestrated a situation to test Hezekiah's faith and demonstrate his power. Sennacherib, undeterred by Hezekiah's efforts, sent high-ranking officials and a massive army to Jerusalem, demanding surrender. The Assyrian delegation, positioned by the aqueduct of the upper pool on the road to Fuller's Field, sought to deliver a message to King Hezekiah. Eliakim, Shebna, and Joah, representing the king, met them since Hezekiah was unavailable. The Rabshakeh, Sennacherib's spokesperson, questioned Hezekiah's confidence, mocking their reliance on empty words. He belittled their trust in Egypt, comparing it to a fragile reed that would only harm those who leaned on it. Dismissing their claim to trust in the Lord, he pointed out Hezekiah's removal of high places and altars, emphasizing worship only at Jerusalem's altar. Attempting to strike a deal, the Rabshakeh offered 2,000 horses if they could provide riders. He ridiculed their dependence on Egypt for chariots and horsemen, questioning their ability to resist Assyria's forces. Claiming divine approval for the invasion, he asserted that the Lord had commanded the destruction of the land, 2 Kings 18. The Rabshakeh aimed to undermine Hezekiah's resolve, portraying Egypt as an unreliable ally and asserting divine approval for Assyria's actions. The Rabshakeh presented a compelling case to convince the people of Judah to surrender. Firstly, he asserted that Judah had angered its God by destroying worship sites, the high places and altars that Hezekiah had demolished. Despite the correctness of Hezekiah's actions, the people might question them in the face of Assyrian threats. Secondly, the spokesperson claimed Judah's army was too weak to resist Assyria, a point supported by Hezekiah's attempt to pay them off. Lastly, he deceitfully asserted that the Lord had commanded the attack, suggesting divine support for Assyria's actions, even claiming, "Your God is on my side." To respond, Eliakim, Shebna, and Joah requested the Rabshakeh to speak in Aramaic instead of Judean Hebrew, as they understood the former and wished to avoid demoralizing the people on the city wall. The Rabshakeh, however, continued in Judean Hebrew, warning the people not to trust Hezekiah or rely on the Lord for rescue from Assyria. The three men's request for negotiations in Aramaic aimed to shield the people on the city wall from the Assyrian threats. However, the Assyrian spokesman disregarded this concern, wanting everyone to fear the king's ultimatum. He even threatened the people in Hebrew, attempting to instill fear and doubt. Continuing his warning, the Rabshakeh urged the people not to believe Hezekiah's promises of the Lord's rescue. Instead, he offered them peace, prosperity, and the assurance of a land similar to their own if they surrendered. This proposition might have sounded tempting to the besieged people of Jerusalem, facing the threat of starvation and isolation. The Assyrians emphasized that deportation to a land resembling their own was part of the deal, promising a land of grain, new wine, olive trees, and honey. However, like Satan's enticing offers, sin never delivers on all its promises. The Rabshakeh's speech concluded with 6 rhetorical questions, essentially claiming that the gods of other nations had not saved them from Assyria, so why would the Lord rescue Jerusalem? The people, following the king's command, remained silent. Hezekiah's officials, torn in grief, reported the distressing encounter to the king, 2 Kings 19, 1-4. Upon hearing the news, Hezekiah tore his clothes, covered himself with sackcloth, and sought the counsel of the prophet Isaiah. He sent Eliakim, Shebna, and the elders of the priests to Isaiah, expressing the dire situation and asking for prayer on behalf of the remnant of Judah. Hezekiah acknowledged the gravity of the moment, hoping that the Lord would hear and rebuke the taunts of the Assyrian Rabshakeh. 2 Kings 19, 1-4. King Hezekiah, faced with distressing news, responded in a way similar to his men by tearing his clothes in grief. Despite his obedience, devotion to God, and previous prosperity through divine providence, he found himself in a situation where God seemed silent. This serves as a reminder that faithfulness to God doesn't shield one from adversity, but it equips individuals to face trials with resilience. Living life from a divine perspective prepares one to rely on God in both good and bad times. Hezekiah, despite his distress, entered the Lord's temple to worship and took a proactive step by sending a delegation in sackcloth to seek guidance from the prophet Isaiah. The delegation conveyed Judah's dire situation, explaining that the Assyrian leader had come to mock the living God. 2 Kings 19, 5-7. Isaiah, already aware through divine knowledge, assured Hezekiah with a message from the Lord, emphasizing the command, "Do not be afraid," a recurring theme in the Bible. Isaiah foretold that God would put a spirit in the Assyrian king, causing him to hear a rumor and return to his own land, ultimately meeting his demise there. In response to the blasphemous words of the Assyrian king's representative, God reassured his people that he had everything under control. Instead of defeating Jerusalem, the Assyrian king, Sennacherib, would be forced to return to his own land and meet his demise by the sword. 2 Kings 19:8-13. The Rabshakeh, upon returning, found the Assyrian king engaged in a battle against Libnah, a fortified city of Judah. Hearing that Tirhakah, the king of Cush, was preparing to fight, Sennacherib diverted his attention from Jerusalem, temporarily shifting his focus. However, he continued to send messages to Hezekiah, challenging him not to trust in his God and recounting the destruction brought upon other nations by the Assyrian kings. Upon receiving the threatening letter from Sennacherib, Hezekiah did not succumb to despair. Instead, he went up to the house of the Lord, spread the letter before God, and offered a heartfelt prayer. In his prayer, Hezekiah addressed God as the one true God, enthroned above the cherubim, the creator of the heavens and the earth. He pleaded for God to hear and see the taunting words of Sennacherib, who sought to defy the living God. Hezekiah acknowledged the Assyrian king's devastation of nations and their false gods, mere creations of human hands. Hezekiah's prayer was a plea for God to save Judah from the Assyrian threat, not just for their sake, but so that all the kingdoms of the earth would recognize that the Lord alone is God. Hezekiah demonstrated a profound trust in God's power and sovereignty. Hezekiah's actions contrasted with the typical response to distress. Instead of tearing his clothes in agony, he brought the issue before God, acknowledging the unique relationship between Israel and the true God, who is not a human creation, but the creator of humanity. Isaiah the prophet conveyed God's response to Hezekiah, assuring him that the Lord had heard his prayer regarding Sennacherib, the king of Assyria. God spoke against Sennacherib, depicting the virgin daughter of Zion, Jerusalem, despising and mocking him. The taunts were directed not just at the king, but against the Holy One of Israel. Sennacherib, in his boastful arrogance, had defied the Lord, claiming to conquer mountains, forests, and rivers. God reminded him that it was the Lord's plan from ancient times to use the king of Assyria as an instrument to bring down fortified cities. The result would be inhabitants left powerless, shattered in spirit and put to shame, likened to scorched plants on housetops before they could grow. This proclamation served as a powerful response to Hezekiah's prayer, affirming God's sovereignty and using the Assyrian king as an instrument to fulfill divine purposes. 2 Kings 19:20-28. God, through Isaiah, addressed Sennacherib directly, asserting his knowledge of the Assyrian king's every move and his raging against the Lord. Due to Sennacherib's arrogance and complacency, God declared his intention to put a hook in the king's nose and a bridle in his lips, turning him back to Assyria by the same route he came. This poetic response highlighted God's sovereignty over the nations, emphasizing that Sennacherib, despite his military might, was merely a pawn on God's chessboard. Every move and thought of the Assyrian king was known to God, who would now exert control over him, demonstrating Sennacherib's insignificance in the face of divine power. 2 Kings 19:29-31. As a sign of assurance to Hezekiah, God promised that, despite the impending siege and fear of starvation, they would eat what grew on its own for the next 2 years. In the third year, they would sow, reap, plant vineyards, and eat their fruit. This sign represented the survival and flourishing of a remnant from Jerusalem and Mount Zion, illustrating God's zeal for his covenant people and his commitment to their well-being. The Lord declared that the king of Assyria would not come to Jerusalem. No arrow would be shot, no shield, and no siege ramp would be raised against the city. God assured that Sennacherib would return the same way he came and would not enter Jerusalem. The reason given was that God would protect the city for his sake and for the sake of his servant David. That very night, the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp. The survivors found all their comrades dead in the morning. Sennacherib, returning to Nineveh, was later assassinated by his own sons while worshipping in the house of Nisroch, his god. Esarhaddon, his son, then became the king. This decisive intervention demonstrated God's power to protect Jerusalem and fulfill his promises, including the covenant with David. It highlighted the contrast between the false gods of the Assyrians and the one true God of Israel, who delivered his people from a formidable threat. 2 Kings 19:32-37. As for your closing question, I'm here to assist you with textual information and guidance. If you have any questions related to the content discussed or need information on a specific topic, feel free to ask.